When I was a kid, I moved around a lot. My dad first left my mother when I was only 5, but he came back every now and then, until my mom finally had enough recorded evidence for the police to take her abuse claim seriously. Even after that, he wasn't allowed anywhere near that house where I spent my first years. I had too many bad memories. My mom took me away, far away, so that we could start again, have a better life somewhere new. But jobs are hard to come by, and the cities didn't have time for someone trying to rebuild their happiness. She always worked a couple of part-time jobs at once, and I know it killed her to have to be away from me at all. When I started asking why she always ate so much less than me, she told me that she was on a diet. I didn't know what that meant, so she told me it was an eating program that would make her happy. I was young and I stopped worrying about it after that. Whenever a better situation would come up, less working hours, higher pay, or a kinder heart, we'd drive a day or two down to a new place. My mom kind of made a game out of it, turned it all into a grand adventure. Of course, I know the reality of the situation now, but my happiest memories are still on the road. Singing rock songs with my mom and being able to choose my own snacks from the gas stations that we passed. So as a result, I changed schools a lot as I grew up. It didn't bother me too much, because it felt like a natural part of life to me. I was never along long enough to form friendships that were hard to let go. I was just internally in transit. I came to class, I talked to other kids, but like a ghost, I was never really there. In grade 3, my mother had a friend of her sister who offered to help cover some grocery costs and give my mom a decent job. So we moved nearby and I started at a new school, Carnan Primary. My teacher there was Miss Varia. She always wore white gloves and a long dress. Her hair was tied up behind her head so that the outline of her forehead was obnoxious and jarring. And whenever she smiled, her lips pressed together so tightly, it looked as if they were holding back slugs that were inside of her mouth. I said exactly that once to another kid, but we'll get to that later. Miss Varia's words were usually nice, but the way they came out of her mouth was like a hiss of steam, and the stiff way she would walk from desk to desk, peering over your shoulder, meant that nobody liked her anyway. All the teachers were like that, to be honest, and they all wore gloves. They'd watch us during playtime, standing at the corners of the oval and staring at the children in the playground. It was a pretty nice looking school, to be honest, and there were trees all around the edge of the property, both inside and outside of the school fence. They were great for playing hide and seek, but sometimes you'd duck behind a tree and one of the teachers would just be standing there, staring. Miri told me that if you got too close to one of the teachers, their heads would spin, bang, and look at you instead. So whenever I saw a teacher, I would just run to another tree a little bit away and hide there instead. Miri was the popular girl. I don't know why she was though, because she was mean to a lot of kids. She scared people by telling stories, like the one about the old lady janitor, whose closet was full of people without faces. But she was especially mean to this one girl whose name I forget, and me of course, because we weren't as well off as her. Sometimes she would sniff at her clothing, and make jokes about living in trailers, or poke fun at the color of the other girl's eyes. Apparently they were bright green, so Mary would always call her Snake or Alligator. I suppose we'll call her Allie for now. Allie would try to tell the teachers about Mary teasing her, but the teachers would always shrug her off, even when she was crying. Eventually, Allie slapped Mary, and of course, as it always goes, Allie was the one who had gotten in trouble. That's when I first learned about the happy room. If you got into serious trouble, the teachers would tell you that you made them very unhappy, and then they would take you to the happy room so that you could learn to make them feel better again. At first, I thought it was just like detention, but when Allie came back to class after going to the happy room, her eyes were wide, and her eyelids were shaking as if all she wanted to do was shut them, but she couldn't do it. I tried to ask her about what had happened, but she would never say a word about it. Ali hated Miri more and more after that, but Miri kept pushing it further and further, and occasionally Ali would snap. Every time this happened, she'd be dragged, kicking and screaming to the happy room. A couple of other kids started getting in trouble a lot too. They were pretty much the same. They'd go in screaming and they'd come out silent, shivering and staring. One of the kids got sent to the happy room for something really weird. As a dare, when Miss Faria walked past her desk, he snatched her glove off. She gave out such a gasp and he burst out laughing, until she took the glove back and twisted two of his fingers. I can remember this much. His right hand, his pointer finger, and his middle finger had been twisted 360 degrees around each other like a corkscrew. Some of the bones in those fingers had snapped and pierced his skin, poking out at strange angles. And the parts of his fingers where those bones should have been were red, glistening, and floppy. He screamed and screamed, and Miss Faria picked him up, practically shot into the class. "I can see I've made you very unhappy, Timmy. So why don't I take you to the happy room so that you can feel better?" She stormed off carrying the boy in her arms. A few minutes later, they both came back into the room quietly. The boy's hand was totally fixed, and there was no evidence of any injury at all. No blood, no wound, no scar, nothing. And like all the others, his eyelids were stuck open, twitching. Miss Faria looked at all of us, and she said, slowly and deliberately, "Nothing has happened here, and if you even think about telling anyone about it, nothing might happen to you too." In the end, people just pretended it never happened, but a lot of people stopped coming to the school. I can't remember exactly how many, or specifically who, but the class started feeling strangely small, that's all. One day, Miri was making fun of how people looked. I don't know why I still wanted to impress her, but I did. So I said the best insult I'd ever thought of, and that Miss Faria looked like she was always trying to hold slugs in her mouth. Miri stopped at once and told me that I shouldn't have said that. I got angry at her, and I told her she only didn't like my insult because it came from me, and she didn't like me because I wasn't filthy rich and spoiled like her and her family. Miri was furious, and told me that I needed to shut my mouth, that my family wouldn't even be afloat if not for hers. It turns out that gracious benefactor to my mom was Mira's dad. I told Mira that I'd rather starve than have to hang out with people like her. She stormed off, and I realized what was going to happen. Sure enough, she came back with Miss Faria, who held my hand in her white, cold glove and said, "You've made me very unhappy. Come with me to the happy room." I didn't want to do it, but I couldn't say no either. She led me back into the school buildings, through corridors and past her classroom. I said, "Can I please just grab a piece of paper to make notes?" She laughed and said that I wouldn't need any. But I said, "Please, I want to learn properly." She tutted impatiently and let me into the room. I put a pen into my pocket and the notebook into my armpit. She resumed the walk, taking me past the legendary janitor's closet, into the basic wooden door with a little sign saying, "Happy Room." An old peeling sticker of a smiley face was molded on the corner of the sign. Miss Faria pushed me through the door and sat me down. "Let me show you something special. I want you to watch very closely." She smiled her gross, ugly smile, with her lips pressed together, and then something slipped out of the corners of her lips. It was almost, no not quite, like a slug, but it was a deep, dark red that stained the desk and it dropped as it wriggled around. Miss Faria laughed as her mouth opened. A flood of leeches poured down her face, like one giant writhing creature growing rapidly, sending out short, fat tentacles to cover the desk. I tried to look away. I tried to close my eyes, but for some reason, I just couldn't. I had to see it all, coming closer and closer towards me. She took off her gloves and I could see her palms for the first time. They had these little black holes in them, and deep inside, I could make out something moving, twisting, Her body was full of leeches. She unbuttoned her shirt and her breast spilled out, also dotted with all these holes that seemed to breathe, seemed to shudder and giggle like mouths covering her body. She stood naked in front of me, bending and stretching her honeycomb skin as underneath it all, something coiled and uncoiled, dark red oozing, crawling. I couldn't look away, but in my moment of panic, my arms flung themselves around, the notebook dropping to the floor. Immediately overwhelmed by a wave of leeches on the floor. Every surface of the room was covered in them, and they were coming up the legs of my seat. It was like being in a stomach, like I would be digested by all the moving, spitting, staining red, like I would be covered in sticky, crawling slime, feel all of their teeth on my skin. And Miss Varia was reaching forwards for me, with her breathing holes, her hands, and if I screamed as I covered in the leeches, and slithered down my tongue, fill my throat, slip inside of me and eat me inside out. And then, my hand felt it. The pen. I grabbed onto it and I slammed it into Mrs. Varia's reaching hand, and I heard a howl that I can't describe. The spell was broken and I could close my eyes, but I didn't want to. I had to get out. She pulled the pen out, stained, lurched forward and stabbed my arm with the pen. I yelled with pain as the hot leech blood mixed with my own inside the wound, gasping for breath as I pulled the pen out. And I pierced the pulsing mass behind her skin, again and again and again. The leeches were retreating off the floor, off the walls and off the door. And as soon as I could see a path, I leaped out of the chair and out of the door. I was in a panic and I was disoriented. Which way had I come down this corridor? I ran in a random direction and I passed doorway after doorway, each labeled Happy Room, and each with a fading sticker. This wasn't the right way. I needed to go in the other direction, but I couldn't stop myself from looking through one of the windows. It was Allie in a Happy Room, and this time it was the janitor who was unfolding, unfurling, and the window in the door was blocked out by the squirming dog postals pressed against the glass. I ran back down the corridor in the other direction, but sooner than I thought it would. The door of that room opened and the old lady janitor was steering Allie down the corridor towards me. Allie's facial features were dripping off her like ink, her green eyes drooping and running down her face, off her chin and onto the floor. And then I didn't know who it was. I barely knew who she was by then, but in that moment, I lost any recognition, any memory of who Allie was. She became nobody. She no longer existed, in the past or in the present, or in the forever future. The janitor saw me and roared that horrible, impossible sound. I opened the nearest door to run into, but it was the closet, and it was just like all the stories. All the faceless bodies inside that still held themselves in pain, suffering eternally but forgotten completely. I turned and I don't know how I managed it, running as fast as I could, anywhere I could, but I made it out of the building. Bleeding, stained red with leeches, all the other children screamed when they saw me running out. I wanted to get out of the school, but the teachers saw me too, and they were all around the fence, coming out from behind the trees, snarling at me. There was no way past. I wanted to fall onto the floor and cry, but my mom, if I didn't come back home, what would she? I had to make it back, for her, and with every bit of energy that my aching, burning body could possibly give, I lunged at one of the teachers, knocking him down. And the gates were locked and the fences were high, but I was a kid. I was poor, I was weak, but I'll be damned if I didn't know how to climb a tree. It was like a fire up my forearm, as the stab wound stretched with each pull up a branch, a murmuring hole at my own body, laughing at my attempt to escape. But I made it to the top of the tree, and I rolled off a branch hanging over the fence, falling through the layers of leaves onto the grass outside of the school grounds. I ran all the way back home. The teachers didn't follow. For some reason, I don't think that they could leave the school at all. You know, I only remembered this a few weeks ago. My mother was diagnosed with ovarian cancer earlier this year. It had already spread to her pelvis by that point, so it wasn't really a matter of treatment anymore. It was just a matter of time. In those last months, sometimes she would stare into the distance as if she was missing something she couldn't explain. I was going through the attic for anything she might like to see again. Before, well, we didn't have pictures from my childhood. We had little things that meant something to us. A mug she used every day, a blanket, and then I found the birth certificates. One for me and one for Bethany. We were born on the same day. We were twins. Initially, I thought it couldn't be real, but then snippets started coming back of my time at Carnan Primary, and eventually I pieced it together to what you read above. It turns out the school burned down a few years back. Some crazed parent lit the whole place up, nothing left but ashes. But I know that even if there were any bodies left, they wouldn't have been identifiable. They wouldn't have been human at all. Whatever was living there in the school and the teachers, I don't think it fed off of people's bodies. I think it fed off of their existences, of people's memories and experiences with them. And once they consumed it all, it's as if they never existed, and they just fade out of your life without you ever realizing. And there might be traces of them left around, here and there, but the human mind does a great job of filling in unexplainable holes. When I visited my mother for what would be one of the last times, she asked if she could see my scar. I wrote up my sleeve and she kissed it. She cried and told me that she was so sorry that she wasn't good enough. Sorry that she didn't stop him when he hurt me. I held her in my hands and I told her that she was more than good enough, and that she was the best mother that I could ever wish for. And I wanted to go on, to tell her that she never let my father touch me, that she never let him come near me when he was enraged, even if that meant she would get hurt instead, and that she worked tirelessly to not support only herself, not just me, but 2 children, that she loved us both. But I didn't know what would happen if I reminded her of everything, of the way she would hold Bethany's cheeks, look into her eyes and call her a precious emerald. So I just told her that the past was far behind us, and that whatever terrible things had happened in our lives, we had survived it, we had come so far, and that was what mattered in the end. She passed away last Thursday, peacefully in her sleep. I was there until the end, and I know that I'll remember her forever.